You know, we live in a big complicated world. Isolating the individual cause and effect components is the only way we're going to make sense of it. And the fun part is, once we understand all the little bits, you can start putting it all together and start to do some sophisticated stuff. All right, let's draw our very first demand curve. We got two axes. The vertical axis is going to be a P, which stands for price. The horizontal axis is a Q, standing for quantity demanded, a little subscript D there. And the demand curve is going to be downward sloping. We'll label it with a D there. So for a given price, this curve will tell us a given quantity demanded. First things first, we experience a sudden price drop. We're not saying why, we're not saying where it comes from. It just suddenly appears. It happens outside the model. It is the shock, and now we need to find out what happens next. Did this economic shock happen on the axis or off the axis? Well, our vertical axis is price. And so that means we need to move along the curve. At our new lower price, lower down on the curve, it is associated with a higher quantity demanded. A very clear example of this is when Tesla had a surplus of vehicles at their given price point. The only way for them to sell less is by lowering the price, which they did when they cut prices between 6 and 14%. And what was the result? Orders were roughly double production after global price cuts. But of course, relationships change, so too do demand curves. We're going to talk about a number of phenomena that predictably change that relationship between price and quantity demanded. This will show up in our graph as a shift in the demand curve. When at every price point we want to buy more, you have to shift the demand curve to the right. Whereas if at every price point you want to buy less, you shift the demand curve to the left. Income is one of the biggest predictors of demand. Changes in consumer tastes and preferences. Expectations about the future will change your consumption today. Finally, some goods are affected whether you have too many people in the market congesting it or whether you don't have enough needing a network. Changes in the prices of related goods, such as substitutes or complements. Changes in the total population will change the total market demand. However, a reminder, changes in prices will only move along the curve, not shift the curve. You're moving within that relationship, not changing the relationship. Some types of goods will be affected by income differently. A normal good is when you get more income and the demand rises. The more money most folks have, the more crab they purchase. Whereas inferior goods are the type that you buy less the higher your income. Ramen noodles is a classic example. Some say mac and cheese, but that has not been my experience. And at least since growing up and moving out of the house, I might eat less peas than I used to. I mean, they're not bad, but they're not like great either. More broadly, we can see what happens during a recession. Unemployment goes up, incomes decline. Where do people shop more? During the 2008 financial crisis, the stock prices of Walmart went up as the stock prices of Target declined. Walmart in this case was the inferior good and Target was the normal good. To be clear, these labels aren't a judgment. Different people will have different preferences. Some people will consume the same type of goods and services no matter what their income is. It does help us to have a word to describe how income affects demand differently. And especially for you as you go out into the job market, your boss is going to want to know how is your company going to do during a recession. If you have inferior goods, you're going to do fine in a recession. Sometimes we call this a counter-cyclical good. Surprisingly, higher education is often like this. During a recession, people's opportunity cost of going to school is lower. If you're unemployed, you don't miss out on anything by going to school, and so enrollments rise. Likewise, when the economy is very, very strong, the opportunity cost of going to school is a little higher, the labor market's a little stronger, and we get slightly lower enrollments. And especially if you're a firm, you want to make sure you have a diversity of goods and services, some of which people will buy more when times are hot, and some of which people will buy more when times are less hot, so that the business's revenues will balance out over the course of a business cycle. But I can't talk about the effect of income on demand enough. Higher income means less scarcity. One is simply able to afford more things. They don't have to face as many hard trade-offs as they had before. And this leads to higher demand overall. Another aspect is that high levels of inequality mean that individuals' demand curves will be very, very different from each other. So when we talk about willingness to pay of a demand curve, a huge chunk of that is simply the ability to pay, not necessarily because people have different desires. Hence, when we use demand curves to start making moral arguments about who should get what or who should not get it, we need to realize that the total market demand is going to be highly influenced by those in the market who have the most resources. Another significant component that will affect the demand curves are the prices of related goods. Two goods may be a substitute for each other. They can replace each other. For example, if the price of steak goes up, the quantity demanded for chicken will also go up. Even though they're not the same market, one will affect the other, meaning that the price of steak will cause the demand curve for chicken to shift to the right. And as we have already alluded, Target and Walmart are two substitutes. If the price of Target goes down, Walmart's demand will also come down. This is the competitive force in a market that keeps prices from going to the moon. On the other hand, two goods might be complements. They go together. If the price of printers goes up, the demand curve for ink will shift down. And if the price of coffee were to get cheaper, you betcha that the demand curve for croissants might go up a little bit. Now, of course, people just have different tastes and preferences, and these can change through time. Companies spend billions of dollars each year attempting to influence our preferences via advertising. As a side note, economists are only lukewarm when it comes to advertising. First, the good. If the advertising is informative, it lets you know about a new good or service that will benefit you that you already would have wanted, well, this is a good thing. And on the other hand, advertising models can often give cheap consumer goods and even necessary public goods, such as journalism, which helps fight corruption, and this keeps corporations and governments in check, and they are largely funded via advertising. But on the other hand, a lot of advertising is just a wasteful rat race. Everybody knows Starbucks exists, everybody knows Dunkin' Donuts exist, and yet they both advertise against each other because if one doesn't advertise, the other's going to lose market share. And so we get bombarded with a lot of ads that are simply a waste of time and resources and our scarce energy as content consumers and humans. But hey, tastes and preferences will change for many reasons. There can just be a shift in social pressure. For example, we're a lot more environmentally conscious today as consumers than we were 50 years ago. That's going to affect what we want to buy. And tastes and preferences can also change just by fashion trends. Some of this is good. We humans like variety. We like novelty. And on the other hand, some of this is just keeping up with the Joneses is usually not considered the road to happiness. Let's talk about expectations. What would you do if the Friday after Thanksgiving, Black Friday, Microsoft announces that Xbox is going on a very deep discount? They are going to lower the price. It's October, you were planning on buying one, but now that you expect the price to drop, you're going to hold off on your consumption today in order to do it later. Your demand curve is going to shift downward today just because there was a change in expectations. And this can work the other way. If something is believed to become more expensive in the future, the demand will rise today. Before a hurricane is about to land, everybody's expecting a huge change in the future. They all run out to the stores and buy everything they can. This aspect about demand has huge implications for inflation. If everyone believes we're going to have a huge amount of inflation, you don't want to wait around and buy when things are more expensive. You're going to buy today. And if everybody increases their demand today, we're going to see higher prices today. So even though expectations are just a function of belief, they have real influence not only on the microeconomy, but on the macroeconomy. Next, let's talk about network effects. This is when a good becomes more useful when other people use it. If more people buy a good, your demand increases. Example of this are popular social media platforms. It doesn't do you any good to write a post and have no one read it. Likewise, your feed isn't going to be good unless other people are posting high quality content. So these are funny little markets. They actually tend towards monopolies. It's very hard to break in. TikTok was able to break in on YouTube because it was so much better than what was out there at the current time. Not only was it revolutionizing the short platform, but the quality of the algorithm was just so good. It fed you exactly what you wanted. Why was the quality of the algorithm so good? Because it had more and more data to feed to it. So in terms of how should we manage this, it's a little tricky. You don't necessarily want a perfectly competitive market with lots of little social media apps because each individual app won't have a large enough community to create a high enough quality product. How should we regulate these natural monopolies is a very active debate in the economic research. Kind of related, but the opposite, are congestion goods. This is when they become less valuable when a whole bunch of other people use it. If more people buy a good, your personal demand is going to decrease. An example of this, of course, is rush hour with roads, or a park or a recreation place. As soon as it gets too crowded, it's time to bolt. This often can be an issue for public goods. Many economists advocate for some sort of rush hour congestion pricing to help solve it. And finally, the last market demand shifter we talk about is simply population. You have population growth will result in an increasing demand for any given price. Now, on the one hand, some people might think this is a little trivial. You will be shocked at how many people will brag about how their revenues went up and people are buying more and more. They want to take credit for whatever particular marketing campaign, or new innovation, or new tweak here, or new management style there, when in the end, oftentimes, it's just a result of population growth. So if you want to make those causal analyses, you need a control for population. Tune in next time and we'll talk about the other half of the market, supply.